Sometimes all a creative soul needs is a change of scene.
So how's it all going and how's the band? And we broke up and I've got no idea what I'm going to do next. And he looked at me and he said, you want to be in radio. It's like this light just went off in my head. And I went, I do.
But what happens when that isn't all that it's cracked up to be?
I'm on air and the manager walks in, mime's shooting me in the head. These guys in suits with laptops showed up and told us that none of us had jobs anymore and we would have to reapply if we wanted our jobs back. And here's the number for the counselling service.
Mary Lou Stevens is a former broadcaster turned best-selling author.
I took 6 months leave without pay to see if I could finish a novel, and once I'd finished it, whether I could do it again.
And what she learned along the way got her where she is. Curiosity
certainly moves across to writing, and especially as I write historical fiction, so there's a lot of research.
May your best years be ahead of you. I'm Andy Marr, and this is Off Mic, Life After Radio. Our guest, Mary Lou Stevens, is a best-selling author. She's written Australian historical fiction novels The Last of the Apple Blossom and The Chocolate Factory, and a memoir, Sex, Drugs and Meditation. All of them have received rave reviews from the media and fellow authors alike, and her latest work, The Jam Maker, is out now. But Mary Lou spent quite a bit of time behind the mic as well, both on stage, singing and playing in bands, and then at radio stations 2TM, Mix Townsville, and on ABC Radio in Queensland's Sunshine Coast. Mary Lou and her husband have been living the slow travel life in recent years, setting up in Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Philippines, Uruguay, and currently in Vietnam, where she joins us from today. Mary Lou Stevens, so wonderful to see your face. How are you?
Oh, look, I'm fine. I'm sitting in Vietnam. It's fabulous here. I love being back in Asia. It's lovely.
All right, well, let's hit rewind. You and I met at AFTRS, which is the Australian Film, Television and Radio School in Sydney in Australia. What brought you to AFTRS in 1997?
Yeah, I think I was 10 years older than the oldest other person there. You were all such spring chickens. I'd studied acting at the VCA. I had been playing in bands all over Australia for many years. I'd put all my love, money and energy into music. And then the Port Arthur massacre happened, which was devastating for any of us who grew up in Tasmania, which I did. I went down for the memorial service at Port Arthur, and a friend I'd made in ABC Radio was doing the outside broadcast, so we caught up. And I knew him because I had toured with bands down to Tassie, and he'd always interviewed us and da-da-da-da-da. And he said, let's go out for lunch during the week. So we did, and he said, so how's it all going and how's the band? And I went, we broke up, and I've got no idea what I'm going to do next. And he looked at me and he said, you want to be in radio. And honestly, it was like a light bulb moment. It was physically like that. It's like this light just went off in my head. And I went, I do. That's exactly what I want to do. But how did you know that? And he said, because I know you and I know radio. So I came back from Tasmania, back to Sydney where I was living, and I went to a gig and Simon Marnie was there. People in Sydney will know him from weekends on the ABC. And he said, we are starting off this new aspirant radio station called FBI, and I want you to have a show. And I was like, this is phenomenal because I've only just decided that this is the path I want my life to take. And I come back to Sydney and the first thing that happens is Simon Marnie going, will you do a show for FBI?
And FBI was the funky radio station too.
Yeah, it was just phenomenal. It was only aspirant then. We were just doing little test broadcasts. So it was real pioneer days back then. And then he helped me get into AFTRS. And there I was, and there I met you. Yeah, I was the grandmother of the group.
Oh, wouldn't call you a grandmother. You were the funky auntie, if anything.
That's true. I was the funky auntie. And Lucy and Joy was the head of radio, and Lisa was someone older than me there. And she was just fantastic.
So after you graduated AFTRS, we all sort of went our separate ways to all of the four winds, and you went to Tamworth first, I understand.
Yeah, that was interesting. Back in the days of Jock's Journal, and we would all, it was getting to the end of the year, and we would all pick apart the ads and we'd apply for stuff. And there was an ad for an announcer for 2TM with 5 years experience. And I went, oh, well, there's no point in me applying for that. And I had been to the Tamworth Country Music Festival year after year after year after year, so I already knew people there. But I remember the interview very well. Before I apply for a job, I always really do my research. So I had listened to both the AM and the FM. I hadn't heard one single female voice on air. They didn't even have a woman to voice ads. And so at the interview, Michael says to Bill, so we're going to give her the job? And Bill mutters away as Bill used to. And I said, well, I guess it depends if you need a female voice on air or not. And there was dead silence. And I thought, oh, my God, I have just thrown this interview. There's no way they're going to give me the job. And then Bill goes, well, we actually do, but we're not allowed to say EEO policy and all of that. And, they pretty much gave me the job on the spot. And I think Lucienne must have known, which is why she just kept on insisting that I apply for that job. So, yeah, and I remember very well my first week on air, and I actually rang Lucienne and I said, I've made a horrible mistake. I cannot do this.
What was difficult for you?
I had abusive phone calls from people who didn't like having a woman on air. Yeah, it was just insane. I got called all kinds of names from these people who just thought I was this stupid girl from the city who didn't belong there. Oh, I also had, at one point, I'm on air, the big heavy door opens. Honestly, it was like a airlock going into the studio. And the manager walks in, mimes shooting me in the head, doesn't say anything, and then walks out again. And I'm just left there going, what the hell was that about? So, yeah, it turns out I had mentioned the Northern Daily Leader and he was having a feud with the newspaper in town. And apparently no one was supposed to mention it on air, but no one told me. So, yeah, I was not happy, but I had lots of friends in Tamworth and I really enjoyed being there, and it did get better and better and better, thank God.
Yeah. And then you went from Tamworth, bit of a trip up the road up to Townsville.
Yeah, I got headhunted for the new C and Mix FM stations that they were starting off. I was very keen on being a music director, and I did program some of the music for 2TM while I was there. And so Rod Bryce had done his homework. He knew I wouldn't move anywhere unless I was music director. So I was the music director and breakfast co-host. I learnt so much about radio because I was always dealing with the highly paid consultants. ESP would come in all the time and, want to stir things up. And I was also the assistant program director, so I was in on all the every single meeting, including all the sales and promo stuff. I never got to sleep.
Who needs sleep? This is radio.
Yeah.
You're doing what you love, Mary Lou.
I did.
Aren't you lucky?
So lucky. People would die for this job. Everyone else wants your job. God, how many times have I been hurt? I've told that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so eventually you let someone else have it, and then you moved across to the ABC, which, coming from a commercial background, sounds like the land of milk and honey.
Honestly, when I was at Mix, we did have all the latest gear. I was programming on Selector instead of this ancient old program I was using at 2TM.
Because Bill Corrales would not want to pay rent on a bit of software. He had to buy it and keep it for decades.
He did have that reputation.
Oh, yeah.
People said, oh, gosh, you're going to have such a great time at the ABC and they'll have all the latest equipment and you'll get treated really well. And let me tell you, nothing could have been further from the truth. I dropped back into the land of cartridges. We didn't have ads, but we had promos on cartridges. We did actually have turntables in the studio. There were no computers. Nothing was computerized. I'd say for a year, though, it was my absolute dream job. I was on the Sunshine Coast. I couldn't believe that I'd landed a job as music director for Sunshine and Gold Coast, being on air, on drive, not breakfast, hurrah. So, yeah, I was really happy, but then we got restructured. The first time we got restructured, the first time of many restructures.
What's the feel around the building when there's a big restructure that's just happened?
So I'd say the first one was just appalling. Management did actually apologise for the way they dealt with it, because we were a sister station to the Gold Coast, but we got these phone calls from down there going, something's going on, but we don't know what it is. No one in management will talk to us. We don't know what's happening. And we were completely left in the dark until these guys in suits with laptops showed up and told us that none of us had jobs anymore and we would have to reapply if we wanted our jobs back. And here's the number for the counselling service. Because we're the ABC and we care. My very wise friend said, you might actually even end up with a better job out of this. And that's pretty much what happened for a little while. But then we had a manager who was such a bully that I was driven to meditation and ended up my first book with a major publisher called Sex, Drugs and Meditation. And that was my story about how I saved my job, changed my life, and found a husband all through meditation. But honestly, the ABC drove me to meditation.
And, radio has driven other people to worse things than meditation. Amongst the people that you worked with, how long were you in radio in total?
Oh, gosh. I was with the ABC for 15 years. I think it's about 20 years all up.
Who would you say was the leader that you had that made the most positive impact on you?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I did love Michael Church at 2TM. He was a sweetie. But I had a program director at ABC Sunshine Coast called Anthony Frangi. And he was amazing. That man knows radio inside out. When it was time for him to make a change, and he knew this change was going to upset me dreadfully, he did it in such a way that even though I was upset, I was given something else that I loved almost as much. So it was a political move that he had to make to keep someone else happy, to take away the position of music director from me.
Oh, okay.
But he gave me networked nights and gave me total free rein. He said, you do whatever you like. So I really did have free rein. I was in the studio at night on my own, doing all this stuff and playing lots of music, and it was glorious. And for his sins, he was shafted. But the ABC always shafted good people. But, yeah.
No good deed goes unpunished. And looking back on the radio career, who's the radio pro, whether you've worked with them or not, that you most admire professionally?
Wow. Gosh. I'd like to say you.
But honestly.
This is going to sound funny. But Matt Whittemore, who was in our group, he was just such a genuinely good guy. And for him to have worked with all those horrible bullies at, was it 2UE, and to maintain his dignity and sense of humour, and then to go into producing Sunrise for all those years. Yeah. And now, he's morphed his career yet again. You can talk to him about that because he's no longer, well, he's in the media, but, not TV or radio.
I did some work with Talkback Radio and, I wish I could say I kept my cool as much as Matt does, but, it's a stressful environment.
I also will say, Doug, Uncle Doug.
Doug Mulray.
Yeah. So when I was a musician, we went on his show. So some Swiss makeup company had paid me and my friend, who used to play country music together and do a bit of yodeling for fun, to go on the Doug Mulray show in its heyday, because he loved yodeling. He had a lot of Mary Schneider stuff, who's Australia's queen of yodeling, and because we could do very bad yodeling, they thought this would be fun for this Swiss makeup company. You go on, you plug this, it was their 100th birthday or something, and you do a bit of yodeling for him. And so we went in, and he was such a sweetheart. He was amazing. And he actually said on air, I don't care about the product you're here to plug. Let's talk about you girls. So we talked about what we did and our music. We made some yodeling promos for him after the interview. I didn't work with him. I don't know what he was like to work with. All I have is my experience with him being incredibly welcoming and generous and genuinely interested in us, which I was not expecting. I was expecting some sexist arsehole, to tell you the truth.
And so why did you leave radio?
Another restructure. Thank you, Auntie. Yeah, the ABC. I mean, I had survived several restructures by this point. I had seen the ABC change dramatically. It was just a matter of how stories were told and who was allowed to tell them. But be that as it may, it was the last restructure where the ABC decided that we weren't radio stations anymore. We were newspapers, which was crazy, because newspapers were dying, and so we didn't have a program director anymore. We had a chief of staff. Our particular chief of staff was a journo. She brought in all her journo mates who didn't have jobs anymore because newspapers didn't exist. And we were told by the state manager just to shut up and put up with it and to stop complaining. And I just went, you know what? I've had enough of this.
So, Lou, what do you miss about radio?
Well, now I'm a writer. So I work in a room on my own. I get feedback from my beta readers, at about draft 3. I get feedback from my publisher from draft 5 through to how many drafts it takes. But most of the time I'm working on my own. And so I would say that's what I miss about radio, is being surrounded by, often, not always, like-minded people. And look, I will say this about working for the ABC. We all still believed in what we were doing. I think that's one of the heartbreaking things about it. And we were so dedicated to putting the best shows together that we possibly could. The deadlines are crushing. You're doing a 3 or 4 hour show, you're doing breaking stories, you're having to do a new story every 15 minutes. I mean, it's just full on. But you all believe in what you're doing and you're working together and helping each other out. That was certainly the case for me at ABC Sunshine Coast. But I do miss that camaraderie. But I find that whenever I get together with writers as well, it's just we're a different bunch of beasts. We're kind of more internal. Radio can be very loud.
Yeah. And what don't you miss about radio? Given what you've said about your experiences, we could imagine maybe what that might be, but I'll let you please tell us.
Look, I don't miss deadlines. I have deadlines as a writer and I always hit them. But, I used to do the drive program. So you get to work and you just start working. You do not stop. You don't have time for lunch. You are just constantly under the hammer of having to get all these stories out every day. And it was exhausting.
So, Lou, would you believe we have not taken a single ad break? I think the sales manager is going to come in here and gesticulate furiously if we don't. Can you give us a forward sell?
You're listening to Off Mic, Life After Radio, with Andrew and me, Mary Lou. And coming up, we've got Bazza with the weather and the traffic together.
Actually, coming up, Mary Lou tells us how she got into writing, what skills she picked up in radio that she still uses today, and we discuss the threat that artificial intelligence poses for creative industries everywhere.
Any creative at the moment is just under so much threat. I honestly didn't know whether I'd get another book deal post 2025.
So you left the beauty of management politics and deadlines behind, and you got into writing. Now, you first wrote a memoir, Sex, Drugs and Meditation, and then you've moved into fiction. What brought you there in the first place? Had you been writing all along, or what led you to go that way?
Look, I interviewed so many authors when I was at the ABC. It was one of my favourite things to do. And, they would often say, I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was 4, and my first book was about my bunny rabbit or whatever. I never wanted to be a novelist. I wanted to be a famous singer-songwriter. But when I was with the ABC, and I had a fabulous boss that first year before the restructure. God, I loved him. He's no longer with us. I will just backtrack with this, that when he was dying, he actually said to me, get out of the ABC, Mary Lou. It will kill you. So that's one of the reasons I retired, when I got out of radio when I did. Anyway, I did my Music Lovers tour of the US, and it was back in the days, because I'm so ancient, before mobile phones had cameras, and I took a little Instamatic camera with me, and everyone, including John, his name was John, wanted to see, the photos, and he looked at them and he went, clearly photography is not your thing, Moo. Maybe you should write about it. And I went, oh, okay. So I wrote the equivalent of, when your first day back at primary school and you'd write a composition called My Holiday. Well, that's pretty much what I did. And he loved it. He said to me, I'm reading this in the toilet, which is the highest praise ever because it's the only place I get any privacy. And he was best mates with the news editor of the local newspaper, and they decided I should write a column. So I started writing a weekly column for the Sunshine Coast Daily. So I was writing every week, getting edited every week, and getting paid every week. I did this for 4.5 years, every week, just writing a column, and that's the switch. And I went, I want to do more of this. So I started studying writing. I did workshops. I did master classes. I saved up my money. I took 6 months leave without pay to see if I could finish a novel, and once I'd finished it, whether I could do it again. So that was my first practice novel, the first of several practice novels. But in between all of that, I started writing the memoir, and that got picked up pretty quickly. And I remember John at work saying, oh, you'll be able to leave the ABC, you'll be making so much money, and they'll take you on book tour around. No, it's just not like that in Australia. I stayed at work. I had to keep working. People think you have a publishing deal with a major publisher that you're rolling in it. It is so far from the truth. It really is. Interestingly enough, it's audiobooks more than anything else that are really taking off, and that is due to the ever rising popularity of podcasts. So people have become used to listening to stories and the like, and so that's kind of been like a gateway drug, if you like, into more and more people listening to audiobooks.
Given your experience behind the mic, have you ever thought about reading your audiobooks yourself?
I was going to do the memoir, and I think that would have been pretty vital if I did it, but it never happened. So my last book that came out is called The Chocolate Factory, and it did really well. And they said, would you think about narrating the audiobook? And I went, absolutely not. It has, I might have gone to acting school, but I'm not that good at accents. And I would be crucified. Okay. There's Birmingham accents, there's a Bristol accent, so it's set in 1921, and all these people have come over to start the first Cadbury's factory. We need a professional narrator. We really do. I'm in Asia, or I'm in Uruguay, or, I don't have access to a studio. I don't know people like that here. So, yeah.
Yeah, just buy yourself a little nice, easy dynamic mic, and, you could, and it plugs into USB. So, I collect microphones. It's,
everyone has to have a hobby.
It's a rather silly pursuit, given that voiceover is in the toilet these days. But
Well, one of the interesting things at the Author Day is that the CEO did talk about in the future, when the technology is a bit better, we will be using AIs to narrate audiobooks, but only backlist, not new stuff.
Pity about the voice actors, but that's the way it goes.
Oh, and pity about the writers. I didn't think I would get another book deal after this one that's coming out in February. Any creative at the moment is just under so much threat. So I honestly didn't know whether I'd get another book deal post 2025, but I've got deals for 26 and 2028. So clearly they think that humans still will be writing books.
And certainly still wanting to read books written by humans. So you're not looking to read your own books on the mic, but what other things did you learn from radio that still apply to the work that you do today, Lou?
I think to be in radio, you having a sense of curiosity, I think, is absolutely key, because, well, with the ABC in particular, you're asking questions for a living. And for those interviews to really work, you need to be genuinely curious, and I always am. And that curiosity certainly moves across to writing, and especially as I write historical fiction. So there's a lot of research, and I love the research. Anyone who writes historical fiction loves the research. In fact, we can get a bit bogged down in it and go down rabbit holes, but we always love it. So that curiosity has certainly come in handy. I've got a new publicist at HarperCollins, and we were having our first little meeting on Google Teams or whatever it's called. And he said, so what about radio interviews and other interviews and podcasts? Are you going to be okay with those? And I went, I worked in radio for 20 years. And he went, oh, gosh, that's right. Sorry. So when it comes to doing the publicity for a book, of course, all of that stuff. I remember interviewing an author. It was her first interview, and she was so terrified. And I had to do a pre-record, and I had to coach her through everything. And I just kept saying, editing is our friend. I will make this sound good. I will fix this. But when I get interviewed, it's like people the interviewer, and we're live on radio, and they will just relax because I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing.
So what's on next for you, Mary Lou? You've got The Jam Maker just about to come out. And what lies beyond that?
I write historical fiction set in Tassie, and because my previous books have done so well, my publisher just wants me to keep writing historical fiction set in Tassie. That's the thing about the book industry. Once you're known for something, they just want you to stay there. So readers know exactly what they've got. But I love Tassie. I was born and raised in Tassie. I love the place, so it's not a problem. So back in Australia for that. I actually have no idea where we are going after I come back from Australia. It's interesting, when we started slow travelling, I said to my husband, my life is going to look very much like it looks now. I will be in a room on my own working, no matter where we are. So as long as you're okay with that. And this is the beauty of slow travel, in that we will stay in a place usually for a month, sometimes more. So we don't have to run around and see the sights. We don't have to be tourists. We have plenty of time. I take weekends off. Sometimes I work Saturdays, but Sundays are always my day off. And, it leaves us time to have a look at where we are. And, we usually travel locally, eat locally. We get the vibe of the place, even if we don't get to see all the tourist hotspots.
Well, Mary Lou, congratulations on the new novel, The Jam Maker. It's been so good to catch up.
You too. It's been just lovely.
Wonderful to see your face.
Yeah, thank you.
The incredibly talented Mary Lou Stevens. If you want to find out more about her story, you can check out her memoir, Sex, Drugs and Meditation. I very strongly recommend it. And she's got a new novel out, The Jam Maker. It's out now. If you liked what Mary Lou had to say about how she realised she wanted to be on radio, you've got to check out Stephen Walter Gerard's magic moment in an on-air studio with Aussie radio legend Ronnie Sparks.
He sat me down at the panel and my heart was out my chest. And he said, when I point here, pull this fader down. When I point here, pull this fader up. And I did it. And he said, that was your first crossfade. Don't let it be your last.
You'll find that episode where you found this one. And if you know someone who you think would be a good guest for this podcast, I'd love to know about it. Pop me a comment on YouTube or in your podcast app, or you can grab me on the socials, Instagram, Facebook or Blue Sky. Just search for Off Mic, Life After Radio. I'm Andy Marr. May your best years be ahead of you.